Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today I am delighted to welcome a very special guest, Sheri Langer, who is an author and a screenwriter, or maybe a screenwriter and an author, which is something we're going to talk about. I am really stoked to talk to you. My son is actually at a college class today for screenwriting. So it's the world that I've been in the last few days. So I'm very, very excited to talk to you. How are you doing today, Sheri?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Oh, well, we're delighted to have you. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Roland. And thanks for coming on, Sheri. It's funny because a lot of authors, it depends, I guess, on what you think of yourself as. If you think of yourself as an author first, then, it would make sense to write the novel first. And then if you decide to write it into a screenplay, then you turn it into a screenplay. But if you think of yourself as a screenwriter, then you would start with the screenplay. And then if you decided to novelize it, you would write the novel first or after. It sounds like you typically write your screenplay first, I think, and then you turn it into a novel. But it sounds like you do a lot of other things too. You've turned some of them into TV pilots, and you've made songs and audiobooks. And so the idea today is talking about all of the different formats that books can be put into, the pros and cons of doing it in a certain order, the differences between, what needs to go into a screenplay versus a novel versus, all these other things. You have a certain path that you take in terms of what you do first, right? And that might work for you, might not work for others. But if we talk about why you've chosen that path, then at least people would have an idea about whether that sort of resonates with them. So why don't you start us off by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got started, and then we can go from there.
Well, I got started when I was a toddler. I loved TV. I was often parked in front of a TV. Such as the life of a single mom. And so basically TV movies became friends, and I really enjoyed watching and living vicariously through what I was viewing. So it became an important medium for me. It was really very joyful for me to have the company. So I think initially, I think I always I tend to see the world in sentences. Yeah, that's a crazy thing to say, but when anything would happen, even when I was a kid, I was always thinking, well, how would I explain that happening? How would I describe that happening? Stephen King wrote an excellent book called On Writing. I'm not really a horror person, although I'll get into that a little later, but I loved his book about the craft because it kind of went into that process of, and what happens next, and what happens next. And essentially that's kind of where it began. It's in the living. I don't think I view myself so much as an author or a screenwriter as much as a creative initially, because that's where it all starts. One of my sisters was saying the other day, we were talking about preparing food and things like that. And she was saying, yeah, but when you're doing that, I know you, and you're always thinking, you're always coming up with some kind of words about what you're doing. So you never really have downtime. And I think that that's true of most creatives. You don't really get downtime because your mind is always active and you are always in the process of having these ideas and wanting to bring them to life, no matter what your medium is. Either you can be a fine artist, there's just always something in you that's saying, how do I do this? How do I make this happen? How do I explain what I'm feeling effectively to others? And we have that need to put that forward.
Oh, I love that. You know, what you said just then about how so much writing isn't done when you're actually writing. It's like I wrote a novel, and most of the time that I had done all the work was when I was doing washing up in the evening. I was cooking dinner, doing washing up, and that's the time when your brain is doing those things. And then really it's more like the writing part is just downloading it onto the keyboard.
Exactly. That's well, at least it is for me. I mean, there are people who could be very, very regimented, very disciplined. And I'm not saying that that's not a good thing. And when I have a deadline, for sure, it's a necessity. But a lot of the time, the process is when I'm not sitting at the desk, when I'm doing anything else. Actually, the novel that's out today. Today is my publication day.
Oh, well, muzzle tough.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Yeah, The Space Between Secrets is today is its birthday, and so thank you for celebrating with me. But the initial story happened when I was walking around the lake with one of my daughters, and we were just kind of talking, and all of a sudden it just kind of happens upon me, and there's this baby, and something's going to happen with this baby, and but you know, from that kernel the whole idea kind of mushroomed. So we walked around the lake, continued talking, got in the car, continued talking, went home, continued talking, sat on her bed and continued talking. And in about 4 or 5 hours, I had an outline.
So what happened to the baby?
You have to read the book.
Yeah, you know, it's true. Like, it depends on the person, but like for me, unfortunately, most of my all that sort of churning and thinking happens when I'm trying to sleep. So it's like I don't sleep very well, because as soon as I lie down, close my eyes, try to shut the world out, that's when everything starts spinning, because there's less distraction or whatever, and then it keeps me up because I'm just going through that. And sometimes I have to get up and write it down, otherwise it'll just keep spinning in my head. I have to get it out, I guess, as a sense of, I probably have anxiety about forgetting, the details, or forgetting the idea completely. And until I can get up and write it down, so I know that it's there, and then I can go to sleep, or the next thing starts. But either way, yeah, I can totally relate to that.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that as well. Yeah, I'm sure you keep like a journal of some sort in your night table, like in that drawer.
I use my phone, but yeah.
Because you're young.
Yeah.
Why can't I sleep? He says, as he's like got this bright light shining in his eyes.
It's over on the side. I grab it, type it in, put it. But if I had to write, then I'd have to turn a light on, and I'd have to, it's more.
Right. I get that. I've actually done it. I've done some ideas on my phone too, actually. So that has happened. But I do remember like watching documentaries and reading a couple of articles about very famous writers who would have like little snippets everywhere. Like I think Woody Allen, Neil Simon, they would have notebooks and little things, a line here, a line there, all over the place. That's what I have. Sometimes I said, like, I had this really great idea. I wonder where I put it. So, but yeah, because it's crazy, because there's I have endless notebooks, endless memo pads. It's just yeah. It'll be fun for my kids one day.
They'll have to go through it all. Yeah, so I mean, the idea that you grew up with television, and I mean, as most of us do, right? But you're saying how you sort of when something happens, you're thinking about how to describe yourself. I kind of think of like, I don't really write screenplays, but my idea is, when you write that, it's almost like you have to think more visually too, right? Because you have to come up with how it's going to look on the screen. And often you are using visual elements instead of sentences to tell parts of your story, right? Like if you were to write something, you have to describe it in detail. Whereas if you have a screenplay, a whole page of detail might just be, the background in your set. So it's almost, to me, it's two different, it's very much two different things, screenplay and writing. There's the story, of course, is the core of it, but there is so much difference between the two. And so I guess when you write screenplays first, you almost have to translate all that into description, right?
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is that most of it, when I said that I wanted to describe what was happening, most of it was in inner life, where I wanted to describe the feelings that I was having while I was experiencing something or witnessing something. I also would want to explain it through characters who would be present. That's more interesting. I'm reluctant to say that because as a novelist, you're not supposed to. But the truth is, I prefer dialogue. I am not really comfortable with scenery. I can get into decent details about certain things if they're important to the characters. And the characters are very much alive for me. They had this life and I serve them. People sometimes say, other writers, I've heard them say, the book kind of writes itself. And I so believe that happens. I do believe that you channel energy somehow, or it finds you because it knows you're doing it. and it meets you, it joins you, because it also feels like there's something important going on that needs to be said. So I do prefer dialogue. My editors, they're always saying like, well, the dialogue is really, really strong. It reads like a movie. Like, there's a reason for that. Okay, but this is a book. so you need to add you need to fill out your details, your place. My late mentor, Beverly Swirling, was a historical fiction novelist, and she explained the importance of verisimilitude. Is that a term you're familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, I know the term. I don't use it in everyday
I can't spell
discussions.
Don't ask me to spell it, but the thing is that she explained that to me because she wanted to give the story more ground. So she said, let me understand where you are. And that was for Love Lines. And so there was one day that my husband and I got in the car and we said, well, we've got places to hit because I've got to understand what's going on here. So we went to Yonkers Raceway. I forgot what it's called, something else now, Empire, maybe, something like that. And it has a casino. And the heroine's father had been a gambler, and she had had an experience with him when she was young that she wanted to understand better. So she needed to go there to have those feelings. And we needed to go there. So I walked around the casino. We bet on a race. Just to actually have the sense of place and feeling. Some of it's sense memory. That comes into play a lot. I am a Meisner trained actress, even though I didn't do that much with it. But that's a big part of the whole understanding the dialogue, the characters. That's all part of it. And after the time at the raceway. We went to the hotel where one of the love interests was staying. We went around the city to understand where her office was, the place where she would go to get a donut, just having that sense of place. With this book, I'm going to give away a little bit of a secret. With Space Between Secrets, I've never been to London, but I did use Google Maps. And I did use a lot of research to formulate, how I would explain her stay there.
Well, I think that's fair enough. There are an awful lot of people who've written an awful lot of things about places they've never been.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
that's
Google Maps has made that so much easier now, right?
Yeah, but I remember writing something myself, and then Google Maps, I looked at the streets, and I'm like, this is not a street with a quiet house on. What have I done? And so, like,
well, exactly. You can look at Street View now, and you can even see how the street looks. It's not just a matter of just looking at a map and roads and stuff. You can actually see the kind of stores that are there. You can see the everything that's going on.
Yeah, there's an app called Wander that you can use with the Oculus or any of those. And you can be there and drive around the corner. It's like really, really cool. My 95-year-old uncle who passed away last year, we put him in the Oculus and he went visiting all these different places. It was very cool.
Yeah. I think, that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of times you see authors that write novels and then they get turned into to movies or TV shows. Often they are not the ones that write the screenplay because, I wonder if it's a matter of being able to think differently about you're saying how you think about things in terms of dialogue and all that, whereas and then your editors might say you have to describe it more or whatever, right? So it's almost like a different mindset. If you look at Game of Thrones, if you read those books, right, there's so much in those books, and I'm pretty sure he did not write the screenplays for them. They had screenwriters, and I don't know that he could have, right? I mean, it's just I don't think that's the way he thinks. He needs all the George R. R. Martin needs all that description, right? He, for that to break it down into these small things, and they dropped a lot of stuff, right? And the decisions about what they dropped might have been different than what he had decided. So I think that you've taken this path where you're writing the screenplay and the novel. So that's maybe not the norm, although I think that a lot of authors would love to be able to do both. I think that giving up the control of your own story is probably a very difficult thing for a lot of authors because of those things. They often do make those changes. And as the author, you might not always agree with those changes. So being able to do both is probably beneficial from that perspective.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people don't like editors much. People like their stuff to be pure. When I was younger and my poetry was written, that was it. It was done. It was like, I can't change a single word or else it won't be truthful. It won't be organic. That changes with time. When you start to understand that what you're saying, you want to say it the most effective way that you can, and sometimes you are clouded by your initial feelings, and so you're not really getting across what you mean as well as you might if you give it some time and edit. I really love editors because, as I say in my acknowledgments, it takes a village to raise a book. And you do not have the objectivity that you need. There are things that you will absolutely miss because you can't possibly see them. You were married to them when you wrote those things. So I had a lot of help editing this novel, and I think it made it so much better. And I'm so grateful to my editors at Red Adept for doing that, and for my publisher for hiring such wonderful people that know what they're doing. So yeah, it really, it's a writer should not be resistant to editing. They really, a good editor will only make your work better.
That's very true.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't even imagine though. I didn't even think about it when we had a poet on a few weeks ago on the podcast, and I didn't even think of the idea of editing and how for poetry, I would imagine it's a much harder thing to edit or have someone edit poetry, because the word choice that you've done is usually very specific. Like maybe they'll do a proofread, but I don't think you'd want a very heavy edit, or it would change a lot of the meaning. Whereas it's very different with with a novel or a screenplay. But yeah,
I mean, editing it yourself.
Oh, I mean, that's the thing. I felt such a relief lifted from me when another writer said, you can't edit your own stuff. It's not possible. You have to hire an editor because you will miss things. And it was kind of like, oh, so you mean I don't need to edit? I don't need to feel guilty about editing my work and missing all these things. It was a huge relief.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm actually poetry. With poetry, because it's such a personal medium, it's really difficult. You really can't, or you wouldn't want to necessarily rely. I mean, you could take advice and stuff, but you have to make the changes. So I would probably, I've worked with instructors who've made suggestions, but with poetry, since it really, you don't have the same luxury of time and space and all the rest. So it really must come from you, I think. So, but you can edit yourself, and not be resistant to doing that, to make your statement clearer.
Yeah.
Well, maybe proofread. I can't proofread.
Yeah, proofread. Yeah,
you can do
I mean, for poetry, I think it's fine to have a proofreader. You have things that you spelled wrong, or you used the wrong whatever. But yeah, to do a line edit or a dev edit, or you wouldn't want to do that with poetry. I don't think so. Okay, so so take us through sort of the process that you worked through then, with the novel. So your first work was Dex, and that was in a whole bunch of different mediums, right? So how did that work? How did you do that?
Well, Dex kind of was initially born out of the idea that so many of us in the family had weight issues and the kitchen wasn't fun. And I really wanted to make food fun, make the idea of food fun. So I had a kid have the opposite problem. And so he's very lanky, but he has this extraordinary skill that he learned at the knee of his late grandfather. So with that, I was working with somebody who was working for Mosaic at the time, and she said that family films were really big deal. So I started to have this idea, and I went with it. So it became a screenplay. Then I had another friend who worked with Disney, Warner. She said, I really love it. Here are my notes. So I went back, I changed some stuff. I would say that my work goes through many iterations before it actually hits submit, publish. So with Dex, after it was a screenplay, my late mentor said, like, okay, you need to, if you're going to write it, you're going to write a book. I had an agent who suggested that I did that, and he was the one that actually was talking about intellectual property. And what he had said was that the more intellectual property you have attached to a project, the more control you have and the more you own. So it opens yourself up to more possibilities. Not everybody is comfortable with that, as you say, but I find it challenging but gratifying to work across all different kinds of mediums. So it was okay for me to try my hand at after the screenplay, the novel, and then it was suggested that I write a TV pilot. We had actually pitched Warner Brothers. They loved it. They were the ones that said, we can't make this movie. There's not a large enough budget. So they suggested I turn it into a TV show and to actually look for a meeting with Warner Television. But at the time, I didn't have a pilot, and I was too naive to realize that I could just pitch them an idea. So we went home, and I said, all right, I have to write a pilot. So I did. I took it.
Just like that.
Yeah, I actually co-wrote it with my son. He has a love of writing as well, and he's actually the one responsible for the songs, because that's his thing. But yeah, he co-wrote that the TV pilot with me, and yeah, we just read a couple of books about how to do it. What was involved. It wasn't that big of a stretch from the screenwriting, and I had taken some classes in that. The novel writing came from my mentor. She gave me a master class in novel writing. But even with her, this is the thing about when you're writing different genres. With Beverly, as a historical fiction novelist, her whole emphasis was much more comprehensive. Her landscape was much more comprehensive. I mean, you want to talk about description? She spent 2 or 3 pages talking about a boat. That's not something that you can do when you're writing women's fiction or chick lit or YA, because then pacing means everything. So you cannot get bogged down by those kinds of descriptions, but you still need to paint a picture. So you do, inevitably that's what you learn. You learn to figure out what's important, and that's once you have the experience, you can be better at self-editing. So whereas, let's say, Love Lines, once I submitted it to Red-Adapt, and I was thinking, oh, it was already edited because I worked with a writer. So and she's a professional editor. So they're not going to have anything to do. I feel bad, but okay, it'll all happen really quickly. Wow. So first it went to a content editor, and the content editor said, and this was for Love Lines, she said, don't get intimidated, but I like taking lengthy notes. There were 32 pages of notes.
Wow.
With over 1,400 changes to the manuscript.
Wow.
Right. That was my introduction to, I have no clue. It was really an eye-opener. But she was wonderful, this editor, and she had excellent ideas. I learned that, this genre is not that genre, and the way that you have to formulate it and make it work is completely different. So right. Whereas, Bev was happy with lots of words and lots of descriptions, they were like, get to the point. So, yeah. So it was definitely a learning experience, but with actually that was the second book published. The first book published was Dex, and that was through a different publisher, and he's just a YA company, so children's and YA, and so with him it was a little bit different, and so. But Dex also, as I went through the process, I just learned how to deal with it. And Beverly did help me with that novel as well. So I had the benefit of her input for those two works. This one was a whole different ballgame. Moving into adult fiction is a whole different ballgame than YA. And so since Dex, that imprint was strictly children's and YA. When I moved into Red Adept, it was a game changer for me because it was a whole new learning experience, one that I value. But she was also the one that said, because initially with Dex, I used my whole maiden name. I used Sheri Langer. And then my publisher said, cross marketing. I don't want there to be confusion with your other work. Maybe okay when you're super famous, so when Judy Blume wanted to write adult novels after she was done, or taking a break from YA to write adult novels, she didn't have to change her name because everybody knew. Jennifer Weiner, similar. So, Patterson, same thing. So it was kind of like, all right, but I'm not like so well known at this point, so it was better to go with my married name. So I go with Sheri Langer for my adult fiction.
That's all.
Yeah.
You go ahead, You go ahead, Craig.
I was just going to ask what happened with Dex and with the TV pilot. Did that move forward at all?
It just like Hollywood. You gotta love it, you gotta hate it. It's still possible. Let's just put it that. Right. I have a lot of scripts in addition to the novels. I have several scripts. I work with a friend and colleague at Reynolds Entertainment, and there are a couple of scripts that are in play with major networks. There are a couple of other scripts that we kind of been working on. So everything is kind of like, the balls are in the air. We have to see.
Right. I imagine that's one of the, benefits of turning. When you're a screenwriter, you have to get paid. You have to sort of get these things sold and made into shows. And I guess you could get option, but to get. So you don't always have the income coming in, whereas if you're a novelist, you can start selling your book immediately. So I guess that's one of the benefits then of turning your books into novels is, during that process while you're trying to get it made, you can still sell the story, and then it might even help if it does well, generates a lot of interest. That can only help getting it made into a movie or a show.
Right.
So I can see wanting to do it from that perspective, in that order, from that perspective.
Yeah. Well, for me also, because I prefer dialogue, it's easier for me to get to know my characters through who they are. And that's by giving them a voice. So once I know who they are, then I can have a better idea of what they'll do. So I like to have a finer picture of them first. And then for me, the screenplay acts as an outline for the novel. So
it seems like driving the dialogue. Screenplays are all about dialogue, and dialogue is so important for moving things forward. And I guess, when you're writing the book, instead of like having set directions and the camera doing everything, you've got to conjure up where they are through the use of description. But it's the dialogue that drives everything.
Right. Yeah. And that happens to be where I am strongest. It's the strongest of my skill set. So I rely on it a little. There are other people who do they paint gorgeous pictures with their descriptions, and I love reading their work. I don't think that's where I shine. so yeah.
I was going to say, I think writing as a craft has evolved so much. I remember my parents being like, "Oh, look, here's a book written in 1940 about how to write good books." And it was like, keep dialogue at a minimum. It should all be description. 70% of your book should be description. And it's the opposite now, because, and I think books are better now, to be honest, in a lot of ways, because they are better at communicating things. And what you said earlier about the whole point of writing is when you were a kid, you were trying to explain what was happening. And at the end of the day, that's the most important thing about writing. It's more important to be clear than clever.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's good to be clever too, but
Some of us don't have that option.
yeah, well, we try. But the thing about it is, sure, you know, it's a whole different ballgame now in general. I mean, what was selling even, you know, 20, 30 years ago. I mean, the idea of a romantic comedy is different now than it was. I mean, all my walls are filled with classics because that's my love, you know. When Harry Met Sally, I mean, Nora Ephron is my, you know, heroine, was my heroine, and will always be. I just so tapped into her energy, and I was really so humbled and touched when people were comparing my work to hers, because then it was like, you hear that voice, that's important to me, thank you. So yeah, I do think that the emphasis is different now. We were paying a little bit more attention to the actual dynamic and relationship between people, and now we're paying a lot more attention to what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, you know, and they have to be so busy doing it. And so it's less about the feeling that you get from it and more about the happening of it. That's not my preference, but I'll write it if I need to. So, yeah, it's again, you know, you kind of have to know your audience and learn how to please them. You know, also, I mean, you want to please yourself, but you also want to please the people you want to write for. So that's important too.
Well, if you don't, they won't buy your books.
And there you have it. They won't watch your movie. So, you know, you try. Well, but that's the thing. I mean, you're always trying, and that's why editors, producers, other people who have probably a more objective and different vision of your work are important to bring into the fold, because then you're getting their perspective. I wrote the initial screenplay, Love Lines, and once I met up with my friend, my producer, Kelly, she was kind of like very interested in kind of bringing it to a different place than where it was. And she had a lot of great ideas about how to get it there. So we worked together, and that's when we ended up coming up with a bunch of different scripts, and we forged forward. You know, I am working on this screenplay for The Space Between Secrets. I had originally had a different title for it, and I also had a different idea of where it was going and how it was getting there. So now I have to meet what happened to do it, bring it up to speed. And yeah, I'm also, like I said, not into horror, but I have a couple of ideas for a couple of horror scripts, and I may look to pursue those. But I also might consider them as novels as well. I am not sure.
I mean, some of the most beloved things in fiction have been in multiple iterations. I love Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that was a radio play, and then it was a novel, and then it was a TV show, and then it was a movie.
Right. Yeah. I think that it's all very exciting, and it also gives people the opportunity to become familiar with your work on a variety of different levels and in different ways. And then, you know, not everybody that's going to read the book is going to watch a movie or see the TV show, you know, but people can become familiar. Dex, with Dex, it was crazy because we ended up getting connected with the late, great Ray Schoenfeld. He was the founder of the Food Network, and he was also the founder of CNN. I'm saying it, I know Ted Turner was the money, but it was Reese's idea, and I will always give that to him. We became friendly with him. because he really saw something magical in Dex. And we ended up pitching it to the Food Network, which they were doing really reality and non-scripted, but they granted us an actual pitch meeting, which they never do for a creative script, for scripted. But the VP of marketing was so taken with the idea that she said, I gotta hear this. So we went. Ultimately, the top dogs said, hey, we're reality TV. So, but
yeah, but I think that's the key here is like, you can have one sort of idea, and pushing it through to all these different mediums allows you to figure out where your audience is and meet them in a place that they are prepared to accept that story, right? You don't want to force people that like watching shows to have to read the book to hear your story. You're allowing for all these different options, and maybe it works in some and doesn't work in others, and then you figure that out. Having the ability to put it into those mediums is sort of the hard part, probably, and I guess you have some connections there that allow you to do that. It's harder for somebody who doesn't live in LA or California or whatever to get a lot of these meetings and make all that stuff work, but people still do it, and I've worked with a few authors that have, usually it's the other way around, where they write a book and then they somehow get it pitched to one of them's working through Netflix for their series or whatever.
right.
And like you were saying too about the idea that things have changed a bit from how you thought the story was going to go, when you wrote it, and you might have to rejig how the screenplay is because of that. I almost wonder though whether you even need to, right? Like I go back to the Game of Thrones thing, where the actual show outpaced the novels, and it came to an end, whereas the novels, I mean, I don't know if he'll ever continue them, but he stopped at book 3, and that was over a decade ago. But it wasn't, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but the finale wasn't that well received. And he since said that might not be how I end the books, right? So
Right.
you could technically do something different, right? Then you double dip that audience because they're going to want to see what you did differently.
Absolutely. Love Lines, the screenplay does not follow the novel, because when you're writing a screenplay, you are creating more of an immediate world, so when you're writing a novel, yes, you want to be engaging from the get-go so that there's a reason for readers to turn the page, but you have time. You don't have to do it like that. You do have to do it like that when you're doing a screenplay. So your emphasis becomes different. There was a book in the 90s. I'm pretty sure it was Susan Isaacs. It was Shining Through. I loved the book. And then when I saw the movie, I was shocked because the movie had morphed a couple of male characters into Michael Douglas, and then focused just on one aspect of the novel, which wasn't, to me, what the novel was really about. So that was like a bigger kind of change than what I typically see. Sense and Sensibility was fabulous. I think she did a great job of actually making that cohesive. It worked in sync. So, but it just all depends. It's very, very different when you're trying to establish this world, in a different context. So it takes time, and you really have to pick and choose what's going to make the most sense, because you can't, when you have a novel, you have everything. When you have a screenplay, you can't. You know, not everything is screen worthy. Not everything is scene worthy. So, you know, you have to really figure out a way to tell your story, but again, pacing and what essentially are going to be those gems, those kernels that are going to be most important to move your story along most effectively and most entertainingly.
Yeah, and you have to fit it into that smaller time period. You know, it might take hours and hours and hours to read a book from end to end, but you usually only have 2 hours to tell your story in the movie format.
Well,
so
yeah. Also,
even if it is all screen worthy, you still got to make cuts.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, with Love Lines, when I was doing the screenplay, it was like heartbreaking to say goodbye to some of these scenes. I was like, you're kidding. You know, and I loved the way she said that, and I loved the way when he said that. You know, but there was not. It didn't offer enough to keep it the way that it was, and you had to change it. You have like over 300 pages in a novel, and you know your script is somewhere around 110. So you see right there, you got some work to do.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? We are coming up to the end of the hour, so maybe that is the perfect way to wrap things up. But
Okay.
I find that so interesting. You know, when my son gets back from college, I'm going to be like, I was doing a podcast today about film writing and script writing. Sorry, there we go. But
Great.
Sheri, where can people find out more about you, more about Dex, more about everything that you're doing?
Well, all the work is on it's on Amazon, it's everywhere, Barnes and Noble, all of them, every online bookseller that I know of at this point. I'm on Facebook most of the time. I do a little bit of Instagram. I haven't really gotten into TikTok too much yet. Still waiting on what's going to happen. Yeah, we'll see. China, don't know. So, but I do spend a fair amount of time on Facebook and my author page and my personal page, both there. So that would be great if anybody wants to get in touch. I'd love to hear everybody's thoughts, reviews. I'm all in. So that would be great.
Well, fantastic. We will pop a link down below in the description. So if you have enjoyed listening to Sheri and you want to find out more about her, scroll on down there. And actually, while you're there, you'll see a comment section. So why don't you give Sheri some love and leave a comment and let her know how much you appreciated everything she shared with us today. While you're down there, there's also that like button. There's a subscribe button. There is even a bell icon that you can click and get informed every time we have a brand new episode of Fully Booked, which we will do next week. So thank you very much, Sheri, and we'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Fully Booked. Until then, cheerio.
Thank you.